Today we're going to talk about the judicial branch. So far we've talked about the executive and the legislative, as well as how a bill becomes a law. Today we talk about our nation's court systems. So looking at some of the early systems of law, we have to go back quite a few years. The first is the Code of Hammurabi, which that's kind of where the eye for an eye mentality is developed. And then we're going to move into the Roman law system at about 450 BCE. And then, as we discussed in an earlier presentation, you have English common law. And William Blackstone was really one of the, main thinkers in terms of English law and its role in the colonies. Our courts rely on democratic principles, in particular, the rule of law, as well as controlling the abuse of power. Judges have the ability for what is called judicial review, or the power of the Supreme Court to declare laws and actions of state, local, and even the national government unconstitutional. They're also independent. The courts have to be impartial. They have to make decisions without being influenced by businesses, lobbyists, interest groups, things like that, because they have a life term, if you would say. And if they're influenced, that's going to change the history of the U.S. So in looking at our criminals or our court system, we really have three levels. The first level is going to consist of what we call trial courts, and those are going to be made up of criminal and civil trial courts. So criminal trials hear cases about crime. Okay, so was something stolen? Was somebody murdered? Things like that. Civil trials are going to be cases that include a lawsuit. Now, with these trial courts, you have to have what is called original jurisdiction. It's the authority of a trial court to be the first to hear the case. So if a crime is committed in Delaware County, a trial court in Montana isn't going to have jurisdiction because the crime wasn't committed there. The United States has an adversarial trial system. Okay, the trial is between two sides or two adversaries. It's not somebody versus themselves or somebody versus a crime. It's between two people. So in a civil trial, we have what is called the plaintiff, and that is the person who files the lawsuit. In a criminal trial, we have the prosecutor, the person that represents the government. And then in both trials, you're going to have a defendant, a jury, and a or you might have a public defender. A defendant is someone who is allegedly responsible, whether it's a criminal trial or a civil trial. If it's a criminal trial, it's the person who allegedly committed the crime. If it's a civil trial, it's the person who allegedly owes the plaintiff money. The jury is a group of citizens who hear the evidence and they're going to deliver a verdict in the case. And a public defender is someone who works for the state, and they're often provided for people who cannot afford a private attorney. At this level, some courts choose to try to avoid going to trial by striking a plea bargain. This is an agreement where the defendant chooses to plead guilty for lesser crimes. In return, the government won't look to convict them on a more serious crime. In looking at juries, typically you need to have a jury of your peers. There are some exceptions. We talked about how you can choose to not have a jury, and the judge will be the one who decides if you're guilty or innocent. But you also have what are called grand juries, and those are just larger juries. They typically consist of 16 to 23 people. And grand juries are really used in more serious cases at the federal level. And typically you have what is called an indictment. So if any of you guys watch lawyer shows, you might hear something along the lines of like, oh, like you've been indicted on the charge of criminal trespassing. I don't know. But it's a formal charge of a criminal action by a grand jury. Now, jury duty, it is one of the ways we can serve our political system. And people probably laugh because typically nobody wants to do it, but it is also one of the most powerful actions you can take as a citizen in our country. So at the trial courts, a verdict is given, guilty or innocent, or if it's a lawsuit, the defendant owes X amount of money to the plaintiff. That decision can be appealed, and it can be appealed for a couple of reasons. It can be appealed because there are errors in the law, or procedural due process was unfair. Okay, meaning that the actions that were taking place did not follow our Constitution in the way law should be administered. And when that happens, it's going to go to the second level, or what we call an appeals court. And in an appeals court, you have a panel of judges. Typically it's 3, but you might have more. They're going to hear a case to decide if the decision of the trial court should be reversed. And with their decision, they're going to have 3 types of opinions. The majority opinion states the decision of the court, whether they believe the trial court's opinion should be reversed, or if it should be maintained. They will have a dissenting opinion. This might not always be the case, but the dissenting opinion is issued by judges who disagree with the majority opinion. So if there are 3 judges and 2 of the 3 judges believe that the trial court decision should be reversed, the 3rd judge who agrees with the trial court would write a dissenting opinion. And the 3rd type of opinion is a concurring opinion, and that is a document issued by judges who agree with the majority opinion, but for different reasons. So let's say our panel of judges consists of 5 judges. 3 judges write the majority opinion saying that the trial court was right because let's use a Blue's Clues example. So maybe Steve from Blue's Clues was really wearing green, or really wearing blue, and the majority opinion of the appeals court agrees with the trial court and says he was wearing blue. The dissenting opinion would say the trial court was wrong, he was actually wearing green, and the concurring opinion by the 5th judge might be yes, I agree with the majority opinion, he was wearing blue, however, it was blue polka dots or blue stripes. So that would be an example of a concurring opinion. The appellate courts, or the Court of Appeals, they are going to use precedents and stare decisis for their decisions. And stare decisis simply refers to the principle that the courts should follow precedent. Okay, it's Latin for let the decision stand. Okay, if our courts are constantly changing decisions, it really makes our system ineffective because there's nothing to look at in the past because things have changed so often. And in the U.S., there are 12 regional circuits, 13 Court of Appeals or circuit courts. Each circuit has a Court of Appeals. Random side note here, because I want to talk about some of the other court systems we have. We've got military courts where someone can be court-martialed. That has to do with different branches of the military. You also have tribal courts that deal with crimes that occur to Native Americans on Native American reservations. So after the opinion at the appellate court has been given, and we've now gone through one appeals process, we can appeal again to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has several functions. One, it wants to resolve disputes over federal law, and form adversary or advisory opinions. Okay, they want to provide their opinions to the legislative branch when they are looking to pass a piece of legislation. The Supreme Court has two types of cases that it likes to hear. Typically, they like to hear cases that involve representatives of foreign governments and cases that involve states. And when it comes to jurisdiction, those are really the two types of cases that they have original jurisdiction. Anything else they're going to hear, it's going to come from the appellate courts. When they look at those decisions from the lower courts, typically they're going to look for three things. One, they want to look at court cases that have different opinions. So court cases that court cases where the trial court ruled one way and the appellate court ruled the other way. They also want to look at cases that raise major questions about law, as well as controversial issues. And when they're looking at these cases, they're going to have to grant what is called a writ of certiorari. It's very tough to say, but once you get the hang of it, you're good to go. Which that's an order from the Supreme Court to a lower court to send up the records on a case for review. Okay, they're going to write this saying, we want the facts of the case. We are going to take a look at this. Looking at that writ of certiorari, they'll have different law clerks that sort through potential cases. 4 of the 9 Supreme Court justices must agree to hear a case. Okay, this is known as the rule of 4. It's not like one Supreme Court justice says, I think this is interesting, like I want to hear this case. No, they have to, at least 4 of the 9 have to agree. And if that happens, a petition of certiorari is issued and the case will be heard. Okay, this hardly ever happens. 99% of the cases are denied. Typically, most cases that people appeal to the Supreme Court don't deal with those 3 things that the Supreme Court wants to hear about. So once certiorari is granted, each side will submit a brief or their legal arguments for why they feel they are correct. And those are called briefs, but you also have briefs that can be submitted by lobbyists or amicus curiae briefs. And they are submitted by people not directly involved, but people who would like their opinion submitted in the matter. And after the briefs are read, each side gets an oral argument, and that oral argument is 30 minutes. So each side gets 30 minutes to present their case to the Supreme Court. While you're presenting your case, the justices can ask questions during this time, and they will have read up on your briefs, so they are prepared. So even though you get 30 minutes, you may only get 10 minutes, depending on how many questions you get from the Supreme Court justices. After the oral arguments, the justices are going to vote, and they're going to vote to uphold or reverse the decision of the lower court. Okay, you have a unanimous ruling, which is where all the justices agree on outcomes and reasoning. Okay, they're also going to issue majority opinions, dissenting opinion, or a majority opinion, dissenting opinions, and concurring opinions. And society can really influence the Supreme Court. Okay, we've got public opinion and social values. If you look at how things have changed in the United States over time, at the beginning, for example, we had slavery, and Supreme Court Justice Roger B. Taney ruled in favor of slavery, with the Dred Scott decision. But slavery is eventually going to end with the 13th Amendment, and the court didn't overturn that decision. So you can see it changes with our public opinion and social values over time. In terms of the nomination process, there are really only two things that need to happen in terms of the Constitution. One is someone needs to be nominated by the president, and they need to be approved by the Senate. This is very different compared to some of the other requirements we've looked at. There is no age requirement, no citizen requirement, no citizenship requirement, no residency requirement. Now, saying that, the president's going to nominate someone that they feel will get confirmed because it looks bad if they don't. But after they nominate someone, the White House and the Senate Judiciary Committee, they are going to, let me take a step back. While they're in the nominating process, the White House and the Senate Judiciary Committee are going to meet to pick potential candidates. And the reason they do this is because, like I said a few minutes earlier, it looks bad if a president nominates a candidate and they don't get put on the bench. So the last two Supreme Court justices that were confirmed under President Trump were Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. And it'll be interesting to see if anything happens in regards to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the illness she is currently going through.